If you are over 60, there are things you may still believe God expects from you that He never actually asked you to carry forever. You still say yes when your body and soul desperately need you to say no. You keep trying to hold relationships together that have been changing for years. You feel quietly guilty because your prayer life does not look the way it did 20 or 30 years ago. You still want an explanation for losses God never explained. And perhaps everyone around you expects you to remain the exact same person you have always been. But growing older does not mean becoming spiritually irrelevant. Sometimes it means finally learning the difference between what God actually asks of you and what life, family, habit, or even your own expectations have placed upon your shoulders. The spiritual example of Padre Pio helps us see that faithfulness is not about maintaining every old pattern. It is about remaining close to Christ in the season God has actually given you. And there is one thing countless Christians over 60 still demand from themselves that may be impossible to obtain in this life. It can quietly keep a person from finding peace for decades. And when we reach it, you may realize that something you have been waiting for all these years was never required before you could trust God. But before we look at what changes, we must be absolutely clear about what remains. God does not stop asking us to love Him after 60. He does not make repentance unnecessary. Prayer does not become optional. Charity does not expire with age. The commandments do not fade just because the years advance. What changes is the season of life, and with it, the form that faithful living may take. God may not be asking you to reproduce the life you lived 30 years ago. He is asking you to be faithful with the life you have today. Padre Pio's spiritual example continually brings us back to this simple truth. The center is Christ, not our ability to preserve every former version of ourselves. Before we continue, write in the comments, "Lord, teach me how to be faithful in this season of my life." For decades, you may have been the one who helps, the one who organizes, the one who hosts the family, who drives others to the doctor, who lends money, who resolves the crisis, who accepts an uncomfortable situation just to avoid conflict. And after 60, this behavior often continues merely by habit. You might tell yourself that if you say no, you are selfish. You might believe a Christian should always help. But is that entirely true? Charity is not the absence of boundaries. Saying yes to everything is not the same as loving everyone. Sometimes a sincere and peaceful no is what allows you to rest, to care for your own health, to preserve peace in your home, to pray, and to fulfill the duties that are actually yours. Christian love remains sacrificial, certainly, but sacrifice does not mean that every demand from another person is automatically the will of God. The spirituality of Padre Pio points toward obedience to God before obedience to human expectation. After 60, perhaps one of the holiest words you still need to learn is a peaceful, honest no. But saying no to a request may be easier than accepting the second reality, that some relationships themselves will never return to what they once were. After 60 years of living, you have watched friendships shift. Children create their own families, siblings drift apart, people move to different cities, spouses may enter entirely different phases of life, communities transform, friends pass away. And when this happens, a quiet guilt often sets in. You might feel that your peace has weakened simply because you are no longer as close to certain people as you were before. But love does not demand that every relationship preserve the exact same shape forever. Some relationships remain loving even when they are no longer close. You can forgive someone without resuming a former intimacy. You can love someone from a distance. You can accept that your children have their own lives to navigate. You can stop forcing conversations that no longer flow naturally and allow certain connections to change as time passes. Padre Pio's spiritual example keeps the focus on charity, not possession. You can love someone without requiring them to remain where they once stood in your life. Sometimes maturity means accepting that a relationship can still matter even when it no longer looks familiar. You do not have to erase the good years because the present is different. You can be grateful for what someone once meant to you without forcing the relationship to return to a season that has already passed. This can be especially difficult when the relationship once felt permanent. You may remember years of conversations, holidays, shared struggles, and moments when that person seemed inseparable from your life. But gratitude for what was does not require pretending that nothing has changed. Sometimes peace begins when you stop fighting the present in order to recover the past. And when relationships change, many believers over 60 fall into another role without even noticing it. They become responsible for solving every problem in the family. Two of your adult children argue, and you immediately try to reconcile them. A grandchild faces a struggle, and everyone calls you. Someone needs money, and you step in to provide it. A marriage in the family is failing, and you exhaust yourself trying to save it. Every major decision seems to pass through your hands. This might have been your reality for 30 or 40 years, but at what point did helping your family become feeling responsible for keeping everyone's life together? There is a profound difference between offering support and carrying a weight you were never meant to hold. You can help, but not every problem is your problem. Not every conflict requires your intervention. Not every decision needs your approval. The spiritual lessons we find in Padre Pio continually lead the soul away from control and back toward trust, prayer, and discernment. Through Padre Pio's example, we learn that true spiritual maturity involves knowing when human effort must yield to divine grace. Before you intervene in the next family crisis, you must ask yourself if the issue is truly yours to solve. Are you helping, or are you preventing someone else from taking responsibility for their own life? There are moments when stepping back can feel almost cruel, especially when you have spent decades being the person everyone depends on. But allowing another adult to face a decision, make a mistake, or carry a responsibility does not mean you have stopped loving them. Sometimes it means you are finally allowing them to carry what belongs to their own journey. Sometimes love helps. Sometimes love advises. And sometimes love steps back. And stepping back becomes even harder when the thing changing is not your family, but your own spiritual life. It is common to look back and compare your current faith to the devotion of your earlier decades. You might think about how you used to kneel longer. You used to attend more parish activities. You used to volunteer constantly. You could pray late into the night without falling asleep. You could fast more easily. Now, your knees ache, your back hurts. Fatigue sets in earlier. Medications alter your routine. And with these physical limitations comes a heavy, silent guilt. But fidelity can remain constant, even when its outward form changes. Perhaps in the past, you prayed for 60 minutes on your knees. Today, 15 deeply sincere minutes sitting in a chair might be the truest offering you can give. Perhaps you used to serve physically in countless ministries. Today, your service might look like calling someone who is lonely, praying for a soul in need, offering wise counsel, or simply listening. The example of Padre Pio reminds us that prayer is ultimately a relationship with God, not a performance measured with a stopwatch. The spiritual example of Padre Pio reminds us that physical limitations do not prevent the heart from remaining faithfully directed toward God. God is not asking you to imitate the prayer life of the person you were 30 years ago. He is asking for the heart you have today. And the heart you have today carries something the heart of 30 years ago did not yet possess. It carries decades of experience, prayers, disappointments, recoveries, losses, and lessons learned through time. Your body may do less than it once did, but your prayer can carry a depth that only years of walking with God can produce. As the scriptures say in Psalm 92, the righteous will still bear fruit in old age. The fruit remains even if the branches look different. If this message is helping you see this season of life with greater faith and clarity, subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring the spiritual lessons of Padre Pio and the Catholic faith together. But physical limitations can be accepted. Unanswered questions are much harder. By 60, you have lived long enough to accumulate questions no young person could fully understand. Why did that person die so soon? Why did that marriage fail despite all the prayers? Why did God allow that specific illness? Why did one child remain close to the faith while another walked away entirely? Why was one prayer answered beautifully while another was followed by years of heavy silence? These are not abstract theological debates. They are the quiet agonies of your own history. And sometimes, without realizing it, we make our peace conditional on receiving an explanation. We tell ourselves we cannot truly rest until we know why. After 60 years, some of your questions are already 20, 30, or 40 years old, and they remain completely unanswered. Perhaps you have told yourself for decades that one day you will understand, and perhaps you will, but perhaps you will not. At least, not in this life. Faith does not require you to possess an explanation for every chapter before you can trust the author. Some questions remain with us because the answer was never placed within our reach. You can revisit the same memory for years, examine every decision, every prayer, every moment, and still arrive at the same silence. At some point, faith may ask something different from you, not to solve the mystery, but to stop allowing the mystery to decide whether God is worthy of your trust. We are not saying you should stop feeling sorrow for what happened. We are saying you must stop demanding that the past make perfect sense before you can live in peace with God. There may be losses in your life that defy explanation. There may be injustices that were never repaired. There may be paths you walked that you never would have chosen. Padre Pio's spiritual life points us toward a trust that survives mystery. Through Padre Pio's example, we see a man who endured profound physical and spiritual trials, yet remained anchored in Christ, even when the reasons were hidden. The spirituality of Padre Pio teaches us that the intellect does not need to comprehend everything for the soul to remain faithful. What if the peace you are waiting for does not come from finally learning why? What if it comes from discovering that Christ can still be trusted, even when the reason remains unanswered? The book of Proverbs instructs us to trust in the Lord with all our heart, and not to lean entirely on our own understanding. Perhaps your prayer needs to change. Instead of asking the Lord to explain the past, the prayer of maturity becomes a declaration. Lord, I still do not understand this, but I no longer want this question to stand between you and me. Some mysteries are not solved, they are surrendered. And when you stop demanding an answer from every chapter of your past, another possibility appears. You no longer have to remain the person that chapter created. Over the course of decades, the people around you construct an identity for you. They say that Dad is the strong one, Mom never complains, Grandma keeps everyone together. He never needs help. She is always available, and because you love them, you begin to maintain this character. You play the role they assigned to you, but after 60, something shifts. Perhaps you finally need help. Perhaps you crave more silence. Perhaps you want to return to God after years of distance. Perhaps you have learned to set boundaries, or you need to ask for forgiveness, or your priorities have simply changed. You no longer want to play the role of the one who never rests. You are allowed to let grace change you, even if the people around you preferred the older version of you. The spiritual example of Padre Pio points us toward conversion as something ongoing, not something completed in youth. The lessons we find in the life of Padre Pio reveal that the soul is always in a state of formation, always being drawn closer to truth. If you were known as the strong one, it is permissible to say that you need help. If you were proud, it is time to say that you were wrong. If you were always busy, you are allowed to say that you need to slow down. Your history explains you. It does not have to imprison you. There is no betrayal in becoming different from the person you needed to be 20 or 30 years ago. Some roles helped you survive difficult seasons, protect your family, or carry responsibilities that once belonged to you. But a role that was necessary then does not automatically have to define the rest of your life. And that leads to the final thing many people over 60 quietly demand from themselves: making every remaining year count in some extraordinary way. When a person realizes that time is no longer endless, a new kind of pressure often begins. I need to travel now. I need to fix the house. I need to repair every broken relationship. I need to leave a grand legacy behind. I need to spend more time with everyone. I need to make up for lost time. Even retirement can turn into a new exhausting race, but consider this contradiction. You spent 40 years rushing because there was too much life ahead of you. Do not spend the next 20 rushing because you believe there is too little left. A meaningful life does not need to be a crowded life. Perhaps the temptation now is to measure the years ahead by how much you can still accomplish. But some of the most meaningful moments of this season may never look impressive from the outside. They may be ordinary moments that you would once have rushed past without noticing. There can be immense holiness in a quiet cup of coffee with your spouse, in attending a simple weekday mass, in morning prayer, in a phone call to your child, in playing with a grandchild, in visiting someone who is forgotten, in sitting in silence and simply giving thanks. Padre Pio's spiritual example continually brings the soul back to the present moment before God. Through Padre Pio's example, we are reminded that the Christian life is not measured by frantic activity, but by quiet faithfulness in the duties of today. As Psalm 90 asks of the Lord, "Teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." Numbering your days does not mean stuffing more into them. It means learning what deserves to remain. So, after everything we have discussed, what does God actually still ask of you? He asks you to love, to repent, to forgive, to pray, to remain faithful, to serve where you truly can, to receive help when you truly need it, and to trust Him with the parts of life you cannot carry into your own hands. Faith after 60 is not a smaller faith. It can become a simpler faith. Less performance, less noise, less need to control, more presence, more discernment, more trust. Perhaps you do not need to say yes to every single request. Perhaps not every relationship must look the way it did 20 years ago. Perhaps every family problem is not yours to solve. Perhaps your prayer no longer has to look like it did at 30. Perhaps some questions will remain unanswered. Perhaps you are allowed to become someone different from the person everyone remembers. And perhaps your remaining years do not need to be crowded to be holy. None of this means caring less. It means becoming more discerning about where your love, your time, and your remaining strength truly belong. And perhaps that is one of the gifts this season can offer: greater clarity about what truly deserves your attention. Not everything that once felt urgent still needs to remain urgent. Not every expectation deserves another decade of your life. What remains can become simpler, more intentional, and more centered on God. You have spent decades becoming who you are. You have buried people you loved. You have made mistakes, raised families, watched prayers be answered beautifully, and watched others remain heavily unanswered. You have seen the world change entirely around you, and perhaps this season of life is not asking you to become more impressive. Perhaps it is inviting you to become more surrendered. The spiritual example of Padre Pio ultimately directs us toward Christ, not toward preserving an old version of ourselves, but toward allowing God to complete what He began within us. The spiritual example of Padre Pio reminds us that the same Lord who guided you through earlier years remains with you in this season of life. In the comments, write, "Lord, teach me to live this season with you." And if someone you love is over 60 and struggling to accept how life has changed, share this message with them. After 60, God is not asking you to become who you were. He is asking you to give Him who you are now. Perhaps the years ahead are not meant to be filled with everything you still need to do, but with a deeper awareness of the one who has been with you through everything you have already lived.